Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the regularly scheduled Parks and Sustainability Committee. We are here today joined in the chambers with Councilman J.P. Leninger, my Vice Chair, Councilwoman Betsy Rui, and online we have Councilwoman Josie Raymond. So very short meeting today. We have some special discussion from, let me see here, for Jefferson County Electric Vehicle Readiness Plan by Ms. Littleman. So if you'd like to come up and give your presentation, please announce your name and your title for the record, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie Littman. I am the Deputy Director of the Economic Development Cabinet. And today I'm going to be sharing with you all about our Electric Vehicle Readiness Plan. So we have been working on this project. So the Cabinet for Economic Development, I'm leading it. I used to be over at the Mayor's office doing strategic partnerships, and so started this project over there. But the reason that electric vehicles are a good fit for that is because it touches so many different agencies. There are a lot of agencies within Louisville Metro that have fleet vehicles or who are connected to topics of sustainability, whether it's the Air Pollution Control District, as well as all of our agencies who have fleets, including our first responders. So it was a good position just to try to coordinate all of the different agencies. And so I've been working closely on this with Fleet and Facilities, as well as the Office of Planning and the Office of Sustainability. Are sort of in our core group leading this effort. And then we did a competitive selection process in the fall. We selected AECOM to help us write the plan, and they're working with EHI, who is doing the community engagement portion. So the objectives of this plan are really to help local governments, staff, stakeholders, and residents better understand the challenges and the opportunities related to the electric vehicle transition, and to understand potential strategies for increasing EV affordability and accessibility. And then we know that the reason we've framed it as a readiness plan is that we don't expect that this transition will happen immediately. It is going to take time, and so, but what are the strategies that we can go ahead and identify that will help make Louisville be ready to, to be prepared for the technology changes and evolution that's happening, and also to attract private and federal investment when that time comes in the future. We want to position Louisville to be aligned with the growing EV market that supports clean air, a healthier community, economic development, and tourism. So thinking about it also as like a quality of place perspective. And then, of course, supporting Louisville Metro government's clean energy goals. So in February 2020, Metro Council passed a resolution with some goals to really set the community up for this transition. So 100% clean energy for Metro operations by 2035 and 100% clean energy community-wide by 2040. So some very ambitious goals. And electric vehicles are just part of that, but we wanted to explore how we could further both of those goals, thinking through this lens. And then the last objective is to identify potential funding sources, including public-private partnerships. So we originally started this planning process thinking that it would help us to be competitive for the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant, which is a grant that was funded through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and had a large pool of funds available to cities and states to fund EV charging infrastructure. We did apply for, we've applied a couple times, we lost a round. We applied over the summer right before we started this project, and it turns out that we did get awarded some funds, but then they were immediately sort of put on hold. And so our hope is that still going through this process will set us up for, if those funds ever do become available again, this will really help us to implement them. But if not, if federal funding is not going to be available for a few years, at least setting us up well to attract potential private partners that could help us fund this work. And also to think about some creative things around like energy efficiency savings. So the key focus areas of the plan. There are two big parts to this plan. So the first is thinking about our own fleet with Louisville Metro and doing a zero emission fleet transition plan. And so the reason we specify zero emission is that some vehicles, there are, electric vehicles might not end up being the best fit. There might be other alternative fuels that could be a better fit for some of our medium and heavy-duty vehicles, depending on their cycles. So thinking about all of our different vehicles within Louisville Metro's fleet and all of the different types of services that they help provide in the city, it's a wide range of types of vehicles and types of duty cycles, and so just getting a handle on that, and also thinking about where they're parking, where there could be where there needs to be charging infrastructure built into Louisville Metro-owned facilities. And then the second is strategies so then the other part of our plan is around community-focused charging. And so for both the fleet and the community charging, really thinking about some of those strategies to reduce barriers to adoption. So when we're talking to our fleet operators internally, what are their big concerns with potentially going electric? And then what can we potentially do to help mitigate those, or what are the technology solutions that might be able to solve some of those challenges? And then on the community side, hearing from residents, hearing from business owners who have parking at their business, or who have employees who have parking needs. What are they thinking about the EV transition and installing infrastructure? What are some of the maybe policy or different funding or partnership programs that we could pursue to help address any concerns and facilitate that transition? And then prioritizing charging locations. So this is really when we think about the public charging network here in Louisville, where are there gaps for sort of key groups, and how can we potentially support that either through Louisville Metro-owned sites or helping to kind of forge those relationships with private landowners. And then lastly, community engagement, making sure that we're hearing from all of the different types of potential users, people who are either within our fleet or in driving different types of vehicles, or also community residents who might be thinking about that transition. So progress to date, it's a big scope, so it's about a 12-month planning process. We started in November. We've done a lot on our municipal fleet transition so far, just really gathering the data on all of our different types of vehicles, trying to understand their replacement cycles as well as their duty cycles, where they're parking, those sorts of things, modeling different transition scenarios and starting to understand what our charging infrastructure needs will be just for the municipal fleet. And then on the community side, starting to dig into some of the data that we have, including demographics, current EV adoption, where are people already buying electric vehicles in our city, where is there already charging infrastructure, what sort of existing policies and programs do we have in place, either here or at the state level versus other communities. And then also developing a plan to do some community engagement, including we've done some focus groups, and we have a public survey. We have 2 public surveys that are currently live that I'll talk about more a little later. And also feel free to stop me if there's anything you'd like to talk about, but I do have some discussion questions at the end. So existing vehicle adoption, and so, the first bullet, it's like the number of registered EVs tripled between 2021 and 2024, but it's still very low overall numbers. So we're now over 1% of all vehicles are electric vehicles. Hybrid vehicles are increasing the uptake much more, but it's a steady growth, but it's still a pretty small amount of total vehicles. And it's, if you look at trends across the country, we're pretty on par with a lot of cities. I think places like, California, where there's a lot of charging infrastructure already and things, you do see a higher percentage, but this is pretty on par with a lot of cities of our size. And so, EVs and hybrid vehicles together made up about 2.5% of all vehicles registered in 2024. So it is increasing. And then now we're going to get into a series of maps. So this first one just shows you where the existing charging infrastructure is in our county. And so there are the level 2 chargers, which are the they're the slower chargers. You typically can charge up overnight. And then the fast chargers are the ones where you could charge in 30 minutes to an hour. They're more expensive, but they are being the ones being supported by the state program, if anyone's familiar with that. And so we have a good amount chargers in absolute terms, in terms of where the level of EV adoption is in our city. But there are definitely, we need to keep on track. B, people want the faster chargers than the level 2s. And then also, there are some big gaps when you look at the distribution of chargers. Right now, we have a lot of EV owners in East Louisville. There's a lot of chargers out there. But how do we make sure that this transition, can be felt throughout the entire community, and we don't want people worried about potentially not having infrastructure where they live. So we're looking at these potential gaps in charging infrastructure through 3 different lenses. So the first one is really thinking about gaps in where people work, so where we have areas of job density within Jefferson County. And so the red circles are just sort of the high level, okay, here's where we're seeing we have density of jobs, but we don't have a lot of charging infrastructure. And so, outside of downtown, you see sort of West Louisville down into the south and southwest. And workplace charging is one of the easier strategies for helping with charging infrastructure because people are going to be there for extended periods of time. The next one we're looking at is gaps by multifamily housing density, and this is important to look at because renters, they usually don't have private off-street parking where they can install an EV charger on their own, so they're relying on their landlord, the property owner to install that charging, and so they may be more reliant on public charging infrastructure than someone who has, their own garage off-street. And then the last gap is we're looking at underserved communities, and so these are using, we started this process again trying to tailor towards the CFI grant program, which had the Justice 40 initiative under the previous administration. So those are the census tracts that are highlighted, and these tracts are ones who would benefit from transitioning to EVs because often these tracts have also experienced some of the impacts of pollution and poor air quality and climate change. So it's like we want to make sure that the communities that have been most impacted by climate change are also able to access some of the benefits of this new emerging technology. So those are kind of some of the maps of where we're sort of going to be potentially focusing our recommendations for public charging. However, we do have more recent ones we've just been reviewing with the consultant that actually drill down more deeply, and there are spaces there are sites across the county, so we're definitely going to have good coverage. This was just sort of our initial preliminary, here are the really big gaps that we're seeing, but in our more distilled maps that will come out in the final plan, there's going to be spots throughout the county that we've identified. And so next steps, as I mentioned, we have, we're in the middle of community engagement. We have couple more focus groups, and we have, as I mentioned, two surveys that are out right now. We're starting to develop strategies to support both, again, funding the fleet side and what needs to happen there, but also thinking about this community, broader public infrastructure, and then potential strategies and partnerships. And then we will put this all into the final plan. And so, as I mentioned, we have surveys. It would be great if you all could help share these with your residents because we want to make sure that we hear from a broad array of citizens, whether they are excited about EVs, not excited about EVs, maybe don't have a lot of information, and so they're not sure, maybe they don't have an opinion. It's great to kind of hear from all of those voices, and so we have 2 surveys. One is for the general public. One is for fleet operators, business, and community organizations. So thinking about businesses who have parking, whether to try to understand if they're already thinking about charging infrastructure at their place of business, or they're thinking about if they have their own fleet vehicles. For instance, like Domino's, their fleet vehicles are all EVs or mostly EVs. They made a commitment to that. So thinking about businesses like that who have their own fleet vehicles, trying to understand how they're thinking about it. So if you can help us share this and also take it yourselves, that would be great. And then we have some collateral material that can help just sort of explain what the point of the surveys are, provide more information, and provides a QR code. So it should be hopefully easy for folks to get the link to the surveys. And then now we had a few questions. It would be great to hear from you all your thoughts on these questions, or just I'm happy to also answer any questions that you might have. But just some food for thought, what barriers to adoption do you see for your constituents? What policies, programs, or initiatives do you think might need to be put into place? Where do you see gaps in charging infrastructure? Do you see much in your district? And then what locations and types of sites should be prioritized for public EV charging infrastructure? So we have those three types of sites that we mentioned: commercial centers, transit hubs, multifamily housing. But is one of those more important than the other, or do you have thoughts on other types of organizations? Just how should we try to prioritize where potential charging infrastructure goes? And again, I just want to emphasize too that there isn't any current budget to implement community-wide charging infrastructure. Again, still hopeful that we might get some resources from the federal government. But if not, there's been a lot of interest from potential public-private partnerships that might allow us to install some. So I did want to just clarify that, but happy to take questions or.
Thank you so much, Katie. So I'll start off, if that's okay. I don't see anybody in the queue yet. And just so everybody knows, for the record, we've been joined by Councilwoman Marilyn Parker. If those funds are awarded and we are to put EV stations in, where would those generally go first? And then my second follow-up question to that would be, is there an ROI return for those stations going in? Will we be charging the consumer for using that station that we're going to put in complimentary to them, just so that we can continue to generate the funds to add more stations later? Is my thoughts there. That's my first question.
Yeah, great questions. And one of the reasons why it's nice that this committee is Parks and Sustainability is that in our CFI application, a lot of the sites we put forward were parks, considering that those are, of course, owned by the city, which was a requirement for the grant. But also, those are places that people go and they spend time. And so if you do need to charge, you're going to be there for an hour or two and have that time to charge. So it was a lot of parks and libraries, as well as some of our Louisville Metro service centers where people are coming, the public is coming for services and might be there for a minute. We had also, on our application, we had actually submitted it with the University of Louisville, so they would have some chargers on their campus, as well as the LG&E. And so LG&E was going to make a significant investment as part of the match for this grant. And so what we had considered with them is that they would actually, they would run our charging program. And so we would be providing, obviously we would be providing the land, they would be providing the actual cash match into the grant of $2 million. And they would be then owning and operating the chargers. And that rate there would be a rate to charge. And also there was a bill passed earlier this year that we did have to charge for public charging. So we were going to, of course, be compliant with that, but also there was going to be a discounted rate that LG&E would offer at those chargers compared to what they might offer at their other public chargers, and because the grant would help to subsidize that charging rate. So there would be an amount that would be charged, but it wouldn't be free, but it wouldn't be as high as it would be otherwise. And then, so that is the specific partnership that was considered for the previous CFI grant. Now, again, we may end up taking a different approach based on what this plan recommends.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question and have Councilwoman Parker in the queue. The Louisville Metro fleet, are they mostly bought or leased?
Mostly bought. There are some leased.
And they are Ford, correct?
A lot of Ford, Chevy, okay. And then depending on the type of vehicle, differences.
As far as the fleet for Louisville Metro, because I think we've got some certain contracts with Ford or Chevy or whoever is creating that fleet of vehicles for that particular department, have we entertained or looked at going after that manufacturer of the vehicle to provide the charging stations for that fleet to save us some cost there?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. We've definitely have been reaching out to the OEMs and dealerships as well for, on the training side in terms of like maintenance, but it's an interesting idea. I mean, typically the charging stations themselves are produced by different companies, is what we have seen so far, except for Tesla, but typically there's a wide variety of charging companies that provide equipment. And so I haven't encountered yet if there's like a Ford branded equipment, but that's an interesting idea. I would wonder if they've explored that.
I guess just maybe more than anything, just kind of using that as leverage to say, hey, we're going to buy your vehicles, you provide us the charging stations.
Yeah.
Whether whether they provide it or manufacture it or they have to buy it from a third party, I think that would be a good way to leverage that. Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions. Will LMPD, will they transition all to electric vehicles? And if so, how does that affect their job performance and functionality?
Yeah, it's a great question. They definitely are one of the agencies that have very specific needs for their vehicles, particularly their pursuit vehicles. And so part of this, they are one of the agencies that we have been engaging throughout this process, and they have certainly expressed, their potential concerns around the performance of those vehicles and how it'll work with their duty cycles. So we're taking all of that into consideration, and we're certainly acknowledging when there might, in this current 2025, there might not be the technology of vehicle that is the right fit to transition right now. But there are plenty of sort of lower hanging fruit, I guess, like, light duty passenger vehicles that could go ahead and be transitioned more easily. So we're thinking about that prioritization and that phasing of the vehicles.
Okay. So if we got government federal funds, we could use those on private property? And if so, I'm thinking grocery store sites would be a very efficient place because everyone goes to the grocery.
Yeah.
Not everybody goes to the library, not everybody goes to parks. But anyway, that was just a thinking or a thought. And then barriers, EVs are very expensive, and the underserved, disadvantaged areas, they're going to be much less likely to buy these vehicles. So is there an answer for that?
And it's definitely feedback that we've heard. I think that, given that now there are more EVs going on, you can buy them used. I think that's helping the federal government incentives as well, tax credits. Those are at the point of sale for new vehicles, but also thinking about that used market. But it's certainly something that we've heard. I think that so that's part of what we're trying to think about. Are there other incentives that might need to be put in place? Some of the benefits of EVs is that there's much less in maintenance costs, and then obviously no gas costs. There's charges for electricity, but it's typically going to be significantly less. And so that initial purchase price is a big barrier. We definitely have heard that, as well as that need for, okay, if I'm going to install charging equipment at my house, how much is that going to cost? Do I really want to rely on a public network that I don't have as much control over? So we've heard that for sure.
And I've got one last question. What is the cost of a charging station, the space needed, and how many cars can charge at a time? Actually, that's 3 short questions.
It does depend. I would say the interesting thing that I've learned is that the charging equipment itself, like the tower, is not, it can be around $2,000. Usually what's the most expensive part is if there's any electrical upgrading work that needs to be done at the location. That's really where the price can vary a lot, just depending on if they need to add additional electrical capacity to the site. And so it can be a bit hard to predict. I know that some of our, Metro is already underway of installing some chargers. So there's some chargers out on Armory Place that you may have seen, curbside charging. And that really, that was an area where they did need to do some electrical work. So those were more expensive. Then there's also some chargers out at the out off the outer loop at that government center. They've installed, I think, 6 or 8 chargers that can have dual ports, so they can charge 2 cars at each tower. There are some towers that have more ports. Some of them have single ports, but I would say typically for one tower, it's a dual port charger, if that answers. Did I get all 3 of your questions?
Yeah, sort of. So the space is pretty much the size of the tower and how many cars they can charge. So if it's the size of the tower, so it'd be the space of the tower and where 2
And then
cars
2
can
parking
pull up.
spots,
Okay.
yes, yeah.
That's it.
Thank you, Marilyn, or Councilwoman Parker. Councilwoman Ruby.
Thank you very much. Owning an EV, I understand a lot of the issues you've got going there. One thing that I would suggest, and I have actually talked to planning and design about adding this when they're talking to groups about new construction, it's certainly less expensive to put these things in, or at least get the electric over there so when you're ready to do it, you can do it. Because as noted, the big expense is not the charger itself, it's running the electric out to it.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's part of the EV readiness. Like, how can we help ensure, new development or development that's happening is at least EV ready if they're not going to put in chargers exactly at the time that they're developing, so.
Yeah, I think that needs to be a continuous conversation with anything we do with economic development, any new construction, is to ask our developers to please ensure that you are ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned using alternative fuel sources when you talked about zero emission. What other fuel sources? I know heavy equipment, big trucks, things like that require a lot of energy. So
Yes.
what other power sources do we have besides internal combustion?
So hydrogen fuel is another area that is growing, and they're doing a lot of research, particularly for those larger heavy-duty, whether it's buses or thinking about garbage trucks. Those might be better candidates for hydrogen, which is a little bit, would be farther down the line in terms of our phasing. But there might be cases where an electric battery wouldn't really be a good fit for kind of the duty cycle that it needs to use and how much it weighs. So hydrogen is one of the other ones.
Yes, because batteries are heavy. Having got my car stuck in the mud and the
Yeah.
firefighters could not push it out, absolutely. So yes, I understand hydrogen as a fuel is very energy dense. So the next question as far as that would be is a hydrogen source. Have you all looked at the ability to generate your hydrogen on site, or would you buy that in bulk? I know that's going way far down the line, but have you looked at it?
And getting beyond my personal technical expertise, but we have talked with so the Conn Center at U of L, they are doing a lot of research into hydrogen as a fuel source, and so they are looking into potentially doing some pilot programs. They're a tech hub that they've received some federal funding to do some demonstration projects, and so hopefully, continuing to work with them as they are conducting their research and learning from people around the country. And then, like I said, we'll probably focus in terms of the plan phasing on sort of some of the lower hanging fruit first, and then thinking about allowing that technology to continue to evolve until the point where we're ready. It can really be a good fit for our vehicles. And also doing testing. There's been some good programs where you can kind of borrow a vehicle and test it out for a period of time. And so I think we'll try to keep taking advantage of those as well in partnership with the OEMs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ruby. I'll couple follow-up or a couple last questions I'm gonna ask here. You mentioned, Katie, a couple times on private-public partnership opportunities, and as Councilwoman Parker alluded to a little while ago, everybody goes to the grocery and different shops and malls and things like that. Have we looked at, in the economic development realm, to partner with some of these big box stores or grocery stores or malls to allow them to put that infrastructure in? Because studies have shown that when these places have those fast stations, their sales are increased because of that. Have we looked at anything like that to increase the economic development side of it in any realm or facet?
We've definitely talked about it, and I think that that will be kind of the next phase of our planning process, is thinking about those strategies and potential partnership. And also, we are working, the state is also running their fast charging program, where they have, and theirs is really focused on, I will say, close to the highways, which makes sense, but so there's also that program that they have RFPs out. I believe that they're able to, what they've currently awarded is still funded, so they're actively opening up stations. And so I think through partnership with the state and what they're thinking about for their fast charging program, and then also the potential strategies we might advise in this plan, I think that looking at those kind of commercial centers, grocery stores, or any other type of commercial hub where people would be going and spending a lot of time. And we see them, I think there's at least one of the Meyer has the fast superchargers, Tesla superchargers. They're very popular. They're always being used. So absolutely, we see that.
Awesome. The fast chargers versus the level 2 chargers, do we know the cost difference?
A lot.
A lot.
Yes, I would say, you're looking at versus $2,000 for the equipment, you might be up to like $100,000 for level 3.
Okay. And then as far as the information that you provided for the surveys and getting us to fill them out and our constituents, are you going to email all the council members the survey links so we can
Yeah,
put them in our
I can do
newsletters,
that,
please?
yeah.
All right, great. Thank you. Any other questions, anybody? All right, without any other questions, the planning and zoning, the Parks and Sustainability meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Katie, for presenting. We appreciate it.
Thanks, committee. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.